This chapter is all about objects, and one of the most basic things you need to be able to do with an object is select it. And so in this movie, I'm going to be walking you through how to set up your selection preferences to make that just a little bit more easier for you. So the first thing I'm going to do is zoom in here on this piece of artwork, and I'm going to go right up here to the top left corner, focus on these two paintbrush shapes. When I grab my selection tool, I can come out here and I can select an object simply by clicking on it with my mouse. You'll notice when I click on it that it has this bounding box around the outside of it, indicating that I have it selected. This bounding box is very important. This is what you use to scale, rotate, move it, everything about it corresponds to this bounding box. When I have an object selected, it's very easy just to click on it like so. But if you have a lot of objects on your artboard, you might want to have a more precise way of selecting something. Let's jump into something called outline mode and show you what I mean here. I'm going to press Command or Control Y on my keyboard. And when I press Command or Control Y, it's going to jump me into outline mode, which essentially shows me a skeleton view of the artwork that we're looking at. When I come over here to make a selection of the paintbrush, if I click, nothing happens. That's because when you're in outline mode, it assumes that there's no fills anywhere. It's just the path. So when I select the path, it actually makes the active selection just like it did before. Same thing over here. If I click in the middle, nothing. If I click over here, it selects the shape. That's exactly what I want it to do. Now, in some cases, this makes sense. Like I said, if you have really intricate artwork that you really want to get down to the nitty-gritty and make sure that you get it, or if you're working a lot of times on things that have effects and things like that applied to them, or you don't know what has been done to the artwork, turning on an option that requires you to select the path makes it a lot easier to know exactly what you're working with. So I'm going to press Command or Control Y again to turn outline mode off. And let's go into the selection preferences. I'm going to go to the Edit menu on a PC, the Illustrator menu on a Mac, and I'm going to go down and select Selection and Anchor Display. And we're going to come right here to the very top. The first section of this is the tolerance level. How close do you need to be to an object when you click on the artboard before that object becomes selected? Right now, the tolerance level is 3 pixels. That may be too close. That may be too far away. And that's going to be up to you and how much stuff is on your artboard. If you have a lot of small, intricate pieces of art on your artboard, you might want to knock that down a little bit so you're more precise. If you got big, chunky things on your artboard, you might want to take that up a few notches just so it's easier for you to select things. In the Object Selection by Path option, what you're basically doing here is making Illustrator perform like it's in outline mode all the time. So if I hit OK to that and come back into Illustrator, now if I try to make that same selection I did before, regardless of whether I'm in outline mode or not, when I click in the middle of this paintbrush, nothing happens. Same thing over here. If I find the path, though, and click on it, then it becomes active. And I can be, again, within 3 pixels of the path and still make the active selection. Now, like I said, this is going to be handy in some cases, but not all. So you might not want Illustrator to behave this way. That's easy enough to turn off. Just hit Command or Control K to bring up your preferences again. Switch over to Selection and Anchor Display and uncheck the Object Selection by Path only. Once you do that, Illustrator will perform in its normal fashion. You can also choose whether or not objects snap to a point and how close to that point do they need to be. And then finally, Control-click to select objects behind. That means if you have objects stacked on top of each other, do you have to use the Control key in order to select those objects that are behind them? Finally, the last piece that I usually pay attention to in here is the anchor, point, and handle display. We talked about this briefly in the preferences, but I want to go over these again. If I wanted to change the way that my things are displayed, I could easily change that just by clicking and making this active. And as you start to working with paths, you'll develop your own choices for these. The only thing that I absolutely do recommend having turned on is highlight anchors on mouse over, because many times it can be very difficult to determine where the anchor points are in a given piece of artwork, especially if it's a piece of artwork that you didn't create yourself. So having this turned on allows you to easily find those anchor points and manipulate them to get full control over the thing that you're trying to edit. Once we're done inside of this dialog box, we're going to hit OK. And all of those preferences are now applied, and we can continue our work with making selections of objects.